I used to think the worst thing that could happen to a person was one big tragedy. A funeral, a divorce, a betrayal, a diagnosis, something clear, something you could point to and say, that was the day everything changed. But the older I got, the more I saw something even sadder than that. I saw how people can lose themselves slowly while their life still looks perfectly normal from the outside. And I'm not talking about strangers in some distant way. I'm talking about people I've known, people I've loved, people I've sat with at kitchen tables and on front porches and in waiting rooms. I'm talking about myself, too. I've seen what happens when a person keeps going, keeps helping, keeps saying yes, keeps being useful, and one day realizes they haven't really felt like themselves in years. No big collapse, no dramatic scene, just a slow fading, a quiet disappearance. That is the kind of loss I understand now. And if I'm honest, that is the kind of loss that scares me the most. I knew a woman years ago who was the kind of person everybody depended on. She remembered birthdays, brought food when someone was sick, showed up early, stayed late, never wanted to be any trouble. If you asked how she was doing, she always smiled and said, "I'm fine, just tired." She said it so often people stopped hearing it. One afternoon I was helping her clean up after a family lunch, and when everybody left, she stood there by the sink holding a wet plate and said, "I don't think I'm tired anymore. I think I'm gone." I have never forgotten that, because I knew exactly what she meant. There comes a point when you're not just tired from a busy week or a hard month. You're tired because you have spent too many years living outside yourself. Too many years being what everybody needs. Too many years putting your own feelings at the end of the line. Too many years calling that love, or maturity, or responsibility, when really it was a quiet kind of self-abandonment. A lot of us were raised to believe that being a good person meant handling things without making too much noise. You stayed steady. You kept going. You didn't make everything about you. And there is something decent in that, there really is. Life asks a lot from people. Families need care. Work has to get done. People go through hard seasons. I understand all of that. But somewhere along the way, many of us crossed a line we didn't even notice. We moved from being responsible to disappearing. We got so good at carrying life that we stopped asking whether life was carrying us back. We became dependable, but not present. Functional, but not alive. From the outside, everything still looked fine. The bills were paid, the meals were made, the calls were returned. The days kept moving. But inside, something had gone quiet. I've seen this happen in men who worked their whole lives and thought survival was enough. I had a friend who retired after decades of doing everything right. He worked hard, provided, stayed loyal, kept his head down, never asked for much. Everybody respected him. But a few months after retirement, he told me something that hit me hard. He said, "I built a life, but I don't know how to live in it." That's a painful sentence. And it's more common than people think. Some people get so used to being useful that when the noise slows down, they don't know who they are without the pressure. Without the job, the role, the crisis, the responsibility. Stillness feels unfamiliar. Peace feels almost suspicious. They've spent so many years bracing that even a quiet day makes them restless. I know that feeling too. I've had days where nothing was wrong and still I couldn't relax. My body was sitting down, but my mind was still pacing, still waiting for the next problem. That does something to a person. It teaches you to rush through your own life, to drink your coffee without tasting it, to sit with people you love while half your mind is somewhere else. To answer, "I'm okay," before you've even checked whether it's true. I think a lot of people live like that for years and don't even realize it. They're not living, not really. They're managing, they're maintaining, they're surviving. And yes, there are seasons when survival is all you can do. I would never judge that. But a whole life cannot be lived that way without something getting lost. A person needs more than function. A person needs room to feel their own life while it's happening. One of the quietest ways people lose themselves is by postponing their own inner life in very polite ways. I know because I did that for years. I would tell myself, let me get through this month. Let things calm down. Let the kids get older. Let work settle. Let this one stressful season pass. Later I'll rest. Later I'll speak up. Later I'll do something just because it brings me peace. Later I'll stop pretending I'm okay with things that keep wearing me down. Later. That word has stolen a lot of good years from a lot of good people. Because life rarely clears out and hands you the perfect quiet moment to finally come back to yourself. There is always something. Another expense, another health issue, another family problem, another reason to wait. And if you keep saying later to your own peace, one day you may realize later turned into most of your life. I knew a man who kept saying he was going to take his wife on the trip they always talked about. He would say, "When things slow down, we'll go." But things never slowed down. Then she got sick. Then travel got hard. Then one day she was gone, and all he had left were the old conversations and a drawer full of brochures. I've seen things like that too many times. People save the good things for the perfect season. The nice clothes, the dinner set, the honest conversation, the apology, the boundary, the little trip, the rest, the life they really want to live. They keep waiting for a moment that feels more earned, more calm, more deserved. But what if this is the life? What if this ordinary week is not the waiting room? What if the years you are calling temporary are actually your real years? That truth gets heavier with age. When you're young, you think in huge stretches of time. You assume there will be another chance, another season, another clean beginning. But when you get older, time feels different. Not worse, just more real, more specific. You stop thinking in endless tomorrows. You start feeling how much a year actually means. And some things that seemed manageable when you were younger no longer feel worth the cost. The constant tension, the relationship where you can never fully relax, the habit of always going last, the anxiety that has become so familiar you call it responsibility, the silence you keep naming peace even though it's really just fear of conflict. Age has a way of stripping the pretty names off things. That happened to me too. I used to call my silence maturity. I used to call my exhaustion commitment. I used to call my overthinking caution. I used to call my self-neglect love. And some of those names sounded noble enough that I got away with them for a long time. But life has a way of exposing what things really are. Sometimes it happens in very small moments. Sitting in the car for 5 extra minutes before going inside because you need a little quiet. Standing at the kitchen sink and feeling sad in a way you can't explain. Smiling in a room full of people and realizing you haven't really been present all evening. Lying in bed at night and understanding that what you're feeling is not ordinary tiredness. It's the weight of too many years spent adjusting yourself to keep everything else running. I've known people who hid in small places just to be alone for a few minutes. A woman who used to stay in the laundry room after folding clothes because it was the only place nobody followed her. A man who took the long way home from work because that drive was the only time he didn't feel pulled on. An older friend who told me he stayed up later than he needed to every night because the late hours were the only hours that belonged to him. These stories stay with me because they are so ordinary. Nobody looking from the outside would say those people were in crisis. But inside, something was starving. Something needed air. Something needed a life that felt like it belonged to them, too. I think one of the saddest lies people believe is that being needed is the same as being loved. It isn't. Some people love what you do for them. They love your reliability. They love your patience. They love your ability to show up, smooth things over, carry more than your share, and not ask for much in return. But that is not the same as being known. That is not the same as being cared for in your full humanity. I've seen people spend decades being admired for how much they can hold, while inside they feel completely unseen. I have felt that myself. There is a loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who appreciate your role, but do not really know your heart. That loneliness is heavy, and it gets heavier the longer you pretend it isn't there. I once sat with an older man who had been married for almost 50 years. People admired his marriage. They said it was stable, quiet, strong. But one evening he said something I never forgot. He said, "We stopped fighting because she stopped telling me the truth years ago." That sentence taught me something important. Quiet is not always peace. Sometimes quiet is what happens when one person gets too tired to keep trying to be heard. Real peace has room for honesty. Real peace does not require one person to stay small so everything can look smooth. If your peace depends on your silence, it may not be peace at all. It may just be the absence of open conflict, which is not the same thing. That is another lesson time had to teach me. Not everything that looks stable is healthy. Not everything that looks respectable is alive. A person can have a well-run home, a decent marriage, a long career, grown children, grandkids, a full calendar, and still feel like they have somehow drifted away from themselves. I think that's why small moments start to matter more as you get older. The extra time you sit in the morning sun, the 5 minutes you spend breathing before you answer anyone, the honest sentence you finally say instead of swallowing it, the call you let wait, the invitation you decline, the truth you admit to yourself without dressing it up. Those things sound small, but a life gets lost in small ways, and often it begins to come back in small ways too. I don't believe healing always looks dramatic. Sometimes it is simply a person telling the truth after years of being efficient. Sometimes it is someone finally saying, I am more drained than I've wanted to admit. Sometimes it is realizing that your constant anxiety is not wisdom, it is a habit. Sometimes it is seeing that your patience has turned into self-erasure. Sometimes it is understanding that what you keep calling normal is quietly making you disappear. And once you see that clearly, it becomes harder to keep living the same way. I'm not talking about becoming hard. I'm not talking about throwing everything away. I'm not talking about turning selfish or cold. I'm talking about honesty. The kind that says, this costs too much. The kind that says, I cannot keep giving my peace away just to keep everybody else comfortable. The kind that says, I have spent enough years being useful at the expense of being alive. That kind of honesty can make people uncomfortable. It may change some dynamics. It may disappoint people who are benefiting from your endless availability. But not all guilt is a warning that you're doing something wrong. Sometimes guilt is just what you feel when you stop doing what everyone else got used to. The older I get, the less impressed I am by endurance for its own sake. I don't admire the person who can suffer the most in silence anymore. I am more moved by the person who finally says, this isn't working. The woman who stops apologizing for needing quiet. The man who stops calling burnout purpose. The parent who admits they can't keep carrying everybody emotionally. The older person who stops saving joy for later. The one who uses the nice dishes on a Tuesday. The one who tells the truth in a calm voice. The one who starts protecting what little life is left instead of spending it all on appearances. That, to me, is real wisdom. Not looking strong from the outside, living honestly from the inside. If I could go back and tell my younger self something, I would not say, be stronger. I would say, pay attention. Pay attention to how your body feels when you walk into certain rooms. Pay attention to how often you say, it's fine, when it isn't. Pay attention to whether the life you're protecting is also protecting you. Pay attention to whether you feel calm in your own home. Pay attention to how much of your peace is being traded to keep everything running. Pay attention to whether your kindness is still kindness, or whether it has quietly turned into fear with good manners. And I would say one more thing. Stop giving beautiful names to what is hurting you. Stop calling self-neglect love. Stop calling fear maturity. Stop calling emotional numbness strength. Stop calling delay patience when it is really avoidance. The names matter, because whatever you keep naming in gentle, respectable ways, you will keep allowing. That may be one of the hardest truths life ever gave me, but it may also be one of the most freeing. So here is what I believe now. The saddest way to lose your life is not always in one terrible event. Sometimes it happens in ordinary days, through quiet habits that slowly take you farther and farther away from yourself. A little more silence, a little more postponing, a little more guilt, a little more pretending, a little less joy, a little less truth, a little less of you. And the way back usually does not begin with one dramatic decision. It begins the moment you stop lying to yourself about what your life feels like. It begins when you stop admiring how much pain you can carry and start asking whether the life you are building still has room for you inside it. It begins when you decide that what is left of your years deserves more honesty than performance. And if you ask me, that is not selfish. That is not weakness. That is just a human being finally refusing to disappear quietly.